The median house price in an Australian capital city just crossed $1.03 million. For a lot of people, that number has closed the door on ownership entirely. But there is another Australia sitting outside those city limits, one where you can buy a house for $65,000, where rental yields run above 12%, and where the Royal Flying Doctor Service is your GP. These towns are real, the prices are real, and the catches are real. Because cheap housing in Australia is never just cheap housing. It is always cheap for a reason, and that reason is always worth understanding before you sign anything. 9 towns. Prices from $65,000 to $240,000. Stay for number 1. It has the most active property market on this entire list. 592 homes sold in a single year, and you can still buy a miner's cottage there for under $50,000 if you know what you are getting into. Number 9. Rainbow, Victoria. Rainbow is a grain farming service town in Victoria's Wimmera Mallee, 393 kilometres northwest of Melbourne, and it has the most straightforward story on this list. A classic agricultural community where house prices have softened, the population is stable, and the infrastructure for a quiet regional life is genuinely in place. Median house prices sit at $191,000, down 8.8% over the past year, a modest correction in a market that never inflated dramatically in the first place. Houses spend an average of 48 days on the market. Gross rental yields run at 8.9% on a median weekly rent of $160. The anchor of Rainbow's social infrastructure is the Rainbow P-12 College, a government coeducational school running from prep through to year 12 with a student-to-teacher ratio of 6:1 to 7:1 for its 109 to 121 enrolled students. That ratio means individual attention in a way that most metropolitan schools cannot match, and for families considering the move, it matters. The catch at Rainbow is distance and connection. Getting to Melbourne requires regional coaches to Horsham, then onward connections to Ballarat, then rail to Southern Cross, a total journey of 7 to 10 hours depending on timing. There is no direct rail link and no airport. A local community clinic handles routine care, but anything complex means the 130-kilometre drive to Horsham's regional base hospital. Rainbow works well if your life is oriented around the town itself. It works poorly if you need the city regularly. Number 8. Tara, Queensland. Tara is in Queensland's Western Downs region, 300 kilometres west of Brisbane, in the middle of productive cropping, beef, and wool country. The town has the infrastructure of a functioning agricultural service centre, a 15-bed community hospital co-located with a medical centre providing emergency medicine, GP services, and outpatient clinics, primary and secondary schools, and a Murray's Coaches bus service to Brisbane 3 times a week with a 4.5-hour journey time. Median house prices are $225,000, down 4.3% over the past year. Gross yields run at 6.47% on weekly rents of $230, the lowest yield of any town on this list, which reflects a rental market where demand is thin rather than robust. The catch at Tara is liquidity. The inventory level sits at 7.91 months, which means properties are taking the better part of a year to find buyers. When listings outstay the market this significantly, it signals a mismatch between what sellers expect and what buyers are prepared to pay. For a lifestyle buyer moving there to live, that does not matter. For anyone considering Tara as an investment and expecting the ability to exit in a reasonable timeframe, that number is the single most important one on the page. The Western Downs agricultural economy is productive and established. Tara is not going anywhere, but it is also not growing quickly, and the property market reflects that honestly. Number 7. Peterborough, South Australia. Peterborough is a former railway junction town in South Australia's mid-north, 218 kilometres from Adelaide, and it is the most accessible and structurally supported community on this list for anyone who needs to stay connected to a capital city. The York Peninsula Coaches Mid-North passenger service runs to Adelaide 4 days a week. The Port Pirie bus service provides regular regional routes. And, crucially, for a town with an average resident age of 55 and household incomes running 40.7% below the regional South Australian average, there is a weekly Upper North medical bus that transports residents directly to Adelaide for specialist healthcare appointments. That single service is the reason many older residents can stay in Peterborough rather than relocating to the city as their healthcare needs increase. It is the kind of infrastructure that does not appear in property listings but determines whether a community remains viable decade to decade. The property market has had a significant growth cycle, with median house prices rising 29.7% over the past 12 months to $240,000. At 8.1% gross yield on $320 weekly rents, the income fundamentals are reasonable. The Peterborough Soldiers Memorial Hospital handles acute and emergency care locally. Primary and secondary schooling are established in town. The catch at Peterborough is economic trajectory. The town's historical identity as a railway hub is now a tourism asset. The Steamtown Heritage Rail Centre draws visitors, rather than an active economic engine. Median household incomes are well below the regional average, and the primary population driver is retirement lifestyle migration. That is not a death sentence for a property market, but it means capital growth depends on continued inbound retiree demand rather than employment-driven population growth. Number 6. Norseman, Western Australia. Norseman sits at the western end of the Eyre Highway in the Goldfields-Esperance region of Western Australia, 630 kilometres east of Perth. It is the last town before the Nullarbor. Every eastbound road trip across the continent passes through it. The local economy is built on gold and nickel mining, and the property market has recently shown positive momentum. Median house prices rose 11.4% over the past year to $122,500, supported by a 0.36% vacancy rate and 9.9% gross yield on $325 weekly rents. But Norseman has the worst liquidity metric on this list, a median of 239 days on the market. That number deserves full attention. When a property takes an average of 8 months to sell, it is not because the price is wrong. It is because the pool of potential buyers is extremely small and transactions happen episodically rather than continuously. Norseman's low stock on market of 0.2% looks tight, but the 5.2 months of inventory sitting behind it suggests that the market moves slowly and unpredictably. The Norseman Health Centre handles basic medical care. Specialised clinical needs require the 57-kilometre drive north to Kalgoorlie. There is no direct passenger rail to Perth. You drive, or take a Transwa bus to Kalgoorlie and connect to the Prospector train. Education runs through Norseman Primary School and Norseman West District High School. Norseman is a real community doing real things. But the 239-day median tells you clearly that buying there means committing to the town, because getting out quickly is not an option the market provides. Number 5. Brewarina, New South Wales. Subscribe before number 4, because the next entry is a South Australian opal town where people have been living underground for practical reasons since the 1960s, and the median house price is $69,000. But first, the Barwon River. Brewarina sits in the far northwest of New South Wales, 642 kilometres from Sydney, on the banks of the Barwon River. The town has a population of around 3,400 in the broader statistical area and sits on one of the most significant archaeological sites in Australia, the Brewarina Fish Traps, a heritage-listed system of stonefish weirs constructed by the Njemba people that is estimated to be among the oldest human-made structures on Earth, predating the Egyptian pyramids. The housing market has a median house price of $95,250, down a modest 4.8% over the past year, with 10.4% gross yield on $300 weekly rents. The interesting number beneath the surface is the 33.8% increase in regional land values driven by agricultural demand. The broader district is appreciating even if the town itself is flat, which suggests underlying asset strength in the surrounding country. What makes Brewarina stand out in this list is the quality of its social infrastructure for a town of its size and remoteness. The Brewarina Multi-Purpose Service provides a 24-hour emergency department, 8 acute inpatient beds, 12 residential aged care beds, and a 7-chair renal dialysis unit. 3 separate school options operate: Brewarina Central School K-12, St. Patrick's Parish School, and Brewarina Christian School. And the government runs the subsidised Brewarina Outback Express bus 3 days a week, addressing the reality that private vehicle ownership in the community runs well below the state average. The catch at Brewarina is honesty about what kind of life this is. It is a remote community with genuine Indigenous cultural heritage, a functioning healthcare network, and real agricultural economic foundations. It is not a lifestyle destination. It is a place where people live and work in the far northwest, and the price reflects the distance from everything else. Number 4. Mount Magnet, Western Australia. Mount Magnet is in Western Australia's Murchison region, 567 kilometres north of Perth, and it has the most dramatic statistical profile on this list, and the most important caveat about how to read it. The headline numbers: median house price $97,500, down 15.2% over the past year, but with a 12.5% gross yield on $500 weekly rents. That yield figure is the highest on this list alongside Coober Pedy, and it is driven by mining company housing demand for workers at the local gold extraction operations. Now the caveat: 2 properties sold in Mount Magnet in the past 12 months. 2. When a 15% median price decline is calculated on 2 transactions, the number is statistically meaningless. A single sale of a premium property or a distressed sale can move the entire suburb median by tens of thousands of dollars. The $97,500 median tells you almost nothing about what houses in Mount Magnet are worth in any stable sense. It tells you what 2 transactions settled for in 1 year. The $500 weekly rent, on the other hand, is a real signal. It reflects genuine mining company demand for worker accommodation in a remote location. When mines are active, accommodation is scarce and rents are high. When mines shift to fly-in fly-out rosters or go to care and maintenance, that demand evaporates and rents follow. The nursing post on Welcome Street, staffed by the Western Australian Country Health Service during business hours with linkages to the Emergency Telehealth Service and the Royal Flying Doctor Service, handles local healthcare. The weekly Integrity Coach Lines bus to Perth takes 7 hours and 15 minutes. Skippers Aviation flies to Perth Airport 3 to 4 times weekly in under 2 hours. Mount Magnet is genuinely remote. The yield is genuine. The statistics describing the market are not reliable guides to anything beyond what 2 people paid for houses in one 12-month period. Number 3. Coober Pedy, South Australia. Coober Pedy is 848 kilometres north of Adelaide on the Stuart Highway, and people live underground there, not as a novelty, but because the summer heat regularly exceeds 50 degrees and the rock maintains a stable temperature year-round. The dugout homes are insulated, functional, and in some cases genuinely beautiful. They are also structurally unique enough that standard building inspection processes do not apply, which is worth knowing before you buy one. Median house prices are $69,000, down 18.8% over the past year, with a 12.5% gross yield on $180 weekly rents and a vacancy rate of 0.44% across 2,060 dwellings. The low rent figure relative to the high yield tells you something important. $180 per week is not much money, but $69,000 is not much house price either, and the ratio produces a compelling gross number. Whether the net yield after maintenance in an extreme desert environment, high insurance premiums, and the cost of bringing tradies in from hundreds of kilometres away actually delivers that number is a different question. The cost of living at Coober Pedy is elevated beyond the property price. Minimal rainfall and soil that cannot support vegetation means municipal water is expensive. Fresh food is expensive, and most goods cost significantly more than they would in a regional centre. The Coober Pedy Area School runs kindergarten through Year 12. The regional hospital provides general care. A daily Greyhound bus to Adelaide takes roughly 11 hours. Regional express flies 3 times a week. Coober Pedy is an extraordinary place. The Opal Fields, the underground churches, the dugout homes, the landscape that has doubled as Mars in more than one film production. None of that is understated. But the 18.8% price decline over the past year is a signal that the market is under pressure, and living 848 kilometres from the nearest capital city in temperatures that spend months above 40 degrees is not a lifestyle that suits everyone. The house is cheap. Everything around the house is expensive and distant. Number 2. Andamuka, South Australia. Andamuka is 600 kilometres north of Adelaide and 28 kilometres northeast of Roxby Downs, and it has the cheapest median house price of any town on this list at $65,000. It is an opal mining settlement administered not by a traditional council but by the Outback Communities Authority under a pastoral unincorporated structure, which means, historically, no municipal rates. That sounds attractive until you understand what it also means. Limited capacity to fund capital works, and infrastructure that depends heavily on state and federal funding decisions rather than a local revenue base. The housing market has 98% owner occupancy and a 2% rental share with a 0.44% vacancy rate and 12.1% gross yield. Those numbers reflect a community where almost everyone who lives there owns their home, and the few rental properties available are almost never empty. It is not a rental investment market in any conventional sense. The entire rental pool is tiny. Healthcare is provided by the Andamuka Community Health Service on Hospital Road, a nurse-led clinic operated by the Royal Flying Doctor Service providing primary care, home visits, and 24-hour emergency response. The Andamuka Primary School houses the community library, which is also the town's primary internet access point. There is no public transit. Getting to Adelaide means driving 590 kilometres to the Augusta Highway, catching a taxi to Roxby Downs for a regional flight, or driving to Pimba to connect with a Greyhound bus. At $65,000, Andamuka is not primarily a property investment. It is a lifestyle choice for people who want to be in the Opal Fields, who value the specific community of a remote outback settlement, and to have thought carefully about what it means to have the Royal Flying Doctor service as your after-hours GP. For those people, $65,000 for a house in a community with 98% owner occupancy and zero council rates is genuinely remarkable. For everyone else, it is a number that reflects a place that is very far from everything and priced accordingly. Number 1. Broken Hill, New South Wales. Broken Hill is not just cheap. It is the most active property market on this entire list, with 592 home sales recorded in a single year. Compare that to Mount Magnet's 2 sales or Andamuka's minimal turnover, and the difference in what cheap actually means becomes clear. Broken Hill is a real, functioning regional city with a deep, liquid market, and it starts at $235,000 median. The city is in far west New South Wales, 515 kilometres from Adelaide and 1,160 kilometres from Sydney. It has a Broken Hill base hospital providing full emergency, surgical, and specialist care, not a nurse-led clinic, not a multi-purpose service with 8 beds, but a full base hospital. Multiple primary schools, secondary colleges, and regional vocational campuses operate in the city. The town is on the Transcontinental Railway line with coach services connecting directly to Adelaide and Mildura. The median house price of $235,000 reflects 20.5% growth over the past year, the strongest capital growth of any town on this list. Gross rental yields run at 9.12% on $360 weekly rents, and properties spend a median of 66 days on the market. These are numbers that look like a functioning investment market, not a thin statistical sample. The caveat at Broken Hill is the extreme outliers. Properties are advertised for under $50,000, older miners' cottages that the research describes as requiring substantial, high-cost structural modernisation and carrying heritage, flood, and bushfire risk overlays. The gap between a $235,000 median and a $45,000 listing is not a pricing mystery. It is the difference between a habitable house and a structure that needs tens of thousands of dollars of work before it qualifies as one, in a remote location where tradies are expensive and heritage restrictions limit what you can change. Broken Hill earned the number 1 spot on this list because it is the only town here where cheap housing coexists with real urban infrastructure, genuine market liquidity, and a growth trajectory that suggests the city is not being left behind. The line of load that made Broken Hill possible, the silver lead zinc or body that built the city, has been mostly exhausted. What replaced it is a city that learned to sustain itself on mining heritage tourism, arts, services, and the sheer critical mass of being the only significant regional hub for hundreds of kilometres in any direction. In the affordable regional property market, that critical mass is genuinely rare. 9 towns. Prices from $65,000 to $240,000. Every one of them is cheap for a reason, and every reason is different. Distance, mine cycles, thin markets, agricultural dependency, extreme climate, or simply being somewhere most Australians have never thought to look. The question is never just whether you can afford the house. It is whether you have looked clearly at what surrounds it. If you want more of the Australian property stories that the big city headlines miss, subscribe. We go deep every week.